Happy Monday, everybody. We've made it through another weekend. Yes, we're all here. Fantabuloso. You know him. You love him. Kind of. Here's the king of New Malden, ladies and gentlemen. Neil Longie.
Good morning. Good morning. I discovered some fantastic things over the weekend, which I must share on the show.
Well, you will, and I'm looking forward to it. Don't think I'm not. No. But before we do anything else, I want to pay tribute to somebody who passed away last week, horribly, sadly. My favorite author, along with Anthony Horowitz, my favorite author is a man called Christopher Fowler.
Okay.
And I'm obsessed with his books. He's written a lot of books featuring two characters called Bryant and May, which is a wonderful joke all about, named after the matches, Arthur Bryant and John May. And they are detectives working for a special unit in the police in London. The whole thing's based in London. The stories are magnificent, and I'm obsessed with these books. I met Christopher Fowler. I went to one of his talks. Then we had a long chat. He and I would exchange loads of messages on Twitter. And then 2 years ago, he got cancer. And on Thursday, he died.
I'm sorry.
And I'm just so pleased that I managed to tell him what an honor it was to meet him, how much I admired him, and how fantastic his skill was. If you've never read it, and I've got no vested interest in this, it's not like I've got a percentage from the publishers or something. The books are the Bryant and May series by the late and fabulous, what a lovely man, Christopher Fowler. I hugely recommend them. I don't often do recommendations. It's not my job. But if you like mysteries, if you love London, if you like books that are quirky, can't recommend them highly enough.
I love good cop story as well, detective story. Love
They're
all that.
Really great. He was a brilliant writer. His legacy will live on. That is it. Time for our first guest, and then we're going to hear all about your weekend. Ooh.
Yeah, no, I met some amazing people over the weekend.
No. We better say hellos to some people. Who says boo? I know who that is. That's Liz Sewell. Fool. Good day, Neil and Russ. That's coming in from northeastern United States. Coming in from God knows where.
You went Australian there for a moment, didn't you?
I don't know. Maybe. And I'm from northeastern United States. We go straight to Manhattan, New York City. Elizabeth Green, good morning to you, Elizabeth. But it's bloody cold there. Right. We've had him on before.
All right.
You liked him a lot. I like him a lot. He's a cool guy. His website's cool. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Lamdin.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you again.
Greetings.
How are
you?
All well?
Yeah,
all
very
good?
well. All the better for being on your show.
Oh, you lie like a cheap carpet.
Good to have you back, Charlie. What brings
Very
you back
nice.
today?
Very nice to have you. Very nice to have you back. Now, I was going through your website. Very good. I don't mean like I'm being patronizing. The website looks nice. I mean the info in it's really, really interesting. Interesting stuff.
Are you talking about Best Agent, or are you talking about my personal website?
I'm talking about this one. I was reading this morning. I've had a crazy morning. Just bizarre morning today. It's just been mad. The story so far, I was reading that on your personal website, which I thought was marvelous. Could we talk? I know we'll come on to your estate agency stuff in a bit. Talk us through some of your early stuff, because it's I'm going to use the word inspiring, Longie, because the thing about Charlie is I don't like people who've just been a huge success all the time, because where's the story there? It's the people who've been kicked in the teeth and then pick themselves up. And in my new podcast series, we interviewed Gerald Ratner. What a story that is. So we'll be launching that in a week or two. So Charlie, walk us through a little bit about what happened to you, because I think it was really interesting stuff, if you don't mind.
Of course I don't mind. No, very welcome.
Okay.
I had a very, very comfortable, happy, privileged upbringing. I grew up on a farm in Sussex, big family, lots of animals, happy, safe,
nice,
lovely place, big loving family, lucky place. And but I found school boring, and therefore university wasn't for me. So I decided I didn't know what to do. I started out as an insurance broker in the city, and then I went into the money markets in the city, and I got fired from my job in the city being too outspoken after 3 years there. And at that point, I was still thinking I was going to go the route of the conventional route that everyone's expected you to follow. But I got fired from my job in the city just as all of my friends who had gone to university were finishing university and were coming out for the summer of their life. You know, finishing university, haven't got jobs, finished our exams. It's going to be probably the pinnacle of the summer of freedom in our whole lives. Is that year when you've left uni and you haven't got a career yet. But the last thing I want to do is be stuck behind a desk in an office when all my friends are out living the summer up. So I thought, what should I do for the summer? I know I'll go and do what I did as a teenager. I'll go and wash people's cars, just so I've got a bit of money coming in, but I've got the freedom to go off and do whatever fun. Let's have a final summer. That turned into a business, and for a few years, I ended up employing people. I had a hand car wash in Crawley Station car park in West Sussex. I employed 16 people. I was 23 years old. Half of them were
joking me. 16. Wow.
Yeah, it was busy. It was a busy place. We had a contract deal with a big VW dealership doing all their forecourt cars and their service washes, and it was brutal. And I was literally, not physically, but I was fending off gangsters who wanted to take over my pitch. And
seriously,
the mean streets of Crawley
in West Sussex.
Honestly,
what the hell?
I had. That's a whole other story. So anyway, I was doing that for a while. I then got ill. I got meningitis, viral meningitis, kind of knocked me out physically for a while. And I met a guy. Anyway, I ended up. I mean, I don't know which parts of the story you're most interested in, but there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack. But running that car wash for a few years was an absolute. Yeah, I agree, Elizabeth. A wonderful family actually gives you this bedrock of a foundation for life. It's like an amazing safety net when you've got a big extended family, because no matter how much you pissed everybody off, there's always someone who's not pissed off with you.
Not in my family, there ain't. Anyway, go on.
I've only got a small family, so I have to be a bit more careful, but I get your point.
And then I ended up so I had this, the car washing was meant to be just for the summer, but I ended up making more money than I'd earned in the city. I was only a junior guy in the city. I wasn't making big money. But I also had this freedom, and freedom was addictive. There was no way I was giving up the freedom where, I was working 7 days a week in that car wash. So I worked harder working for myself than I'd ever worked in a job. But
you always do. You always do. It's very important, that point. If it's your own business, you're a slave to it. Hello. And also you put in far more effort than you would if you work for somebody else.
It's true, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because if it goes wrong and doesn't work, then at least it was your own decisions. And I find that easier to live with than your life being disadvantaged because of someone else's decisions that you have no control over. So when you choose to invest your life, giving your productivity to someone, you either choose to work for yourself or you can choose to work for other people. Yeah. And sometimes choosing to work for other people has additional value to it. It's not just the money, but you're learning skills and connections, and so therefore you're building your own personal future.
And there's also,
but sometimes,
Charlie, there's also, if you're working for somebody else, you can, of a Friday night, not always, but often say, well, that's Friday night, done now. And then you can start thinking about it on Monday. When it's your own business, you never stop thinking about it, ever. I know.
I think it's a very important point. Eventually there comes a point. I've been self-employed now for 30 years. And there comes a point when you realize that you must find a way to stop and switch off. Otherwise, you end up with serious problems, serious mental health problems. If you cannot switch off, that's actually why I took up flying.
Oh, burnout.
Because
I know about that.
Yeah.
There are multiple burnout. There's just fatigue, there's sheer exhaustion, but the burnout is another version of. I've had burnout a few times. I have to take 2 months at a time. Yeah, wow. But it's so important to anyone that does work for themselves that you've got to have something, not just as a rest. You can't have the pub as your only alternative to work, because that doesn't end well.
No, that's a one-way trip to a lot of problems if you do that.
Yeah.
A lot of problems. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Forgive me for 1 second. This is important. Because if we're running a mental health and well-being station, Sue Sleet, far from well. I think I know why you won't be around for the rest of the week. Sue, we send all our love to you.
We
Love
do.
to your
Sending
son
love,
Dave,
Sue.
and Dave has been her son has been so supportive to men's radio and women's radio. Sue, you know we wish you well. Couldn't have come at a worse time, but bless
We
you
do.
for that. And
Sending
this
love.
one, Charlie, just so you know, we've got northeastern United States, we've got Manhattan, and whoopsie, I got the wrong one. Chrissy Richards is in the middle of Spain on a farm. She was listening, so you're listening, going out all over the world. Back to the northeastern United States. I've been self-employed for 26 plus years. I've often had a side gig, but my bread and butter has been obtained through my primary work. That's Asa Don Brown in northeastern United States. Burnout.
Well, the northeastern
Winding
United States
down.
is a very big place in my heart. I spent a lot of time in Maine in the United States. I have friends,
Oh.
really good lifelong friends I've made who live and work in Maine up near Bar Harbor. It's a wonderful place. New England it's absolutely stunning around there. Love it.
It is.
Thanks to everyone
I
watching in Maine.
used to live in Connecticut, and it was gorgeous. Worked in Manhattan, lived in Connecticut.
Yeah.
It was fabulous. Fabulous up there.
Yeah.
Very pretty. Very, very pretty. Did you enjoy, when you lived there and visited your pals, did you enjoy what they call Fire Weekend? And I'll briefly explain. It's so beautiful. You ever get the chance to go? There is an optimum week. It's only in northeastern United States, especially New England. And there's an optimum weekend when the leaves, we don't get it here in the UK, when the leaves turn to fire red. It's this one kind of weekend, which is their best color. And the roads are packed and everybody just drives through the countryside as though the trees are on fire. It is so breathtakingly beautiful. If you ever get the chance, go. There you go.
Well, I've been there most September, so I've got to see that quite a lot. But I'm afraid to just do a little bit of a boast. The reason I go to Maine so much is because I fly seaplanes, and Maine has got 6,000 lakes and hundreds of seaplane pilots. And flying around Maine in a seaplane and seeing the trees from the air and landing on the lakes in the wilderness is just magical. It's one of my favorite places in the world.
Is that
Absolutely.
fantastic? Flying a seaplane. How cool is that? Come on.
Yeah.
That is crazy cool.
It's not easy. It's taken some real persistence to make that happen. But my God, it is as cool as it sounds. It's just a magical thing to do.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, hi to all your friends, everyone watching the northeastern United States. Where do we get to?
We're talking about burnout. We're talking about burnout.
Yeah.
Now, Liz said this. So bounce back on this, Charlie, because this is really interesting stuff. I had to make myself work not too hard. I became a hermit. Oh, I can relate to that. Boy, oh boy, can I relate to that. I became a hermit sometimes. Some situations were tough, but I made myself rest. And then Dave Sleet, who's up in Fife in Scotland, real international show today, self-awareness of the burnout time bomb.
And it is a time bomb.
Yeah, is vital. Building burnout vents is essential to reduce the risk and impacts of imploding. One of the wisest people I know, Charlie,
I like that term,
Dave.
burnout vent. I've never heard that before.
Vents.
I like
So
that.
Dave Sleet is the master of coming up with phrases. You think, that's a great phrase. Why didn't I think of that?
So burnout we were talking about, Charlie. You said the pub can't be our only respite, which is sad but true. So go back to there. What were you saying?
I would say, well, I mean, one of the reasons that I chose to learn to fly late in life, I was in my late 30s when I started to do it, was because, when you're learning to fly a plane or when you're flying a plane, you are not thinking about work. I promise you, right?
I would hope not.
You are not thinking about anything else other than surviving.
Flying the plane.
It's not restful. It's not relaxing. Your adrenaline's high, but it is so cathartic. It is so cathathartic.
It sounds like
lots of other
mindfulness
benefits
on
as well.
steroids, because you have to be totally present, don't
But
you?
yeah,
You've got to
it is.
be,
But,
Because
but
if
you're
you
burnt
ain't,
out, you can't fly a plane. I tell you something, guys. Earlier this year, so I fly down in Devon, and there were beautiful days when I should have gone flying. I went up to the airfield with my kids, and I realized when I did my pilot check, I'm not safe to fly. I'm too burnt out. And on a beautiful sunny day when I was going to take my kids to see their grandparents for lunch, and I had to call it and go, I'm not safe to fly. Yeah. And that was burnout, pure burnout. And I mean, what I've learned to recognize it quite early on. And the things I've had to do, you have to get quite extreme if it gets to burnout. I mean, I've done things like, I remember the first time I really, really felt burnt out. I had a dog at the time, my Dalmatian called Bingo. Anyone watching in London may have seen him in Battersea Park a lot in the early 2000s, late 2000s. I knew a friend of mine's parents had a little old cottage on a beach in Cornwall, and I went down there with no phone, let alone no computer, just me and the dog and this cottage. And I gave my mother the address of where I was staying so that if she had to be contacted, and I could be contacted. And I went there, and for 2 weeks, all I did was sleep and walk on the beach and go to the local pub for food. I didn't sit in the pub drinking. I went to the pub for food, and I came back and I read books, I watched telly, and I just completely unplugged. And that was the first. And I realized it was so restorative doing that. I continued to do it.
Charlie, how did that feel? Because I keep promising myself, I don't think I could do it. I'll be honest with you.
When you did it, and I get the restorative power of that, and I think it's a great idea to unplug for a couple of weeks, but when you did it, did you have this kind of internal voice? Because I was screaming, you've got to be doing something, you should be doing something.
Yep, I agree.
Well, it was that voice that had led me to that situation. So I'd almost gone past that point, and to the point where I realized it doesn't matter. If I don't address this, I won't be doing anything. And I just won't be functional. So I mean, the next time it wasn't that long afterwards that I remember I went to Seattle for 11 days on my own. I booked an Airbnb apartment on the side of a lake in Seattle where there was a seaplane dock, and I went on my own. And I'd said to myself, I will go from the bed to the sofa and watch telly, and I'll go out for a walk around the lake, and occasionally I'll go and fly a seaplane. And that's what I did for 11 days. And I remember thinking to myself, it took 7 days for the wheels to stop spinning and actually for the rest to start happening. 7 days isn't long enough, right? 7 days just gets you back to, you need to actually restore. I've worked out there needs to be a minimum of 2 weeks. Minimum of 2 weeks. It's so hard, and you have to be brutal and ruthless to everyone that wants to contact you. You go, guys, you will not be able to contact me. I remember saying to guys I work with, people who worked for me in London, I remember saying, I'm going away for 2 weeks. If the office is burning down, unless you want me to fly home and put it out, I don't want to know about it till I get back.
Yeah.
Like, leave me alone.
It's very telling of our modern lifestyle, isn't it, Charlie? Very telling of our modern lifestyle. I was talking to a friend of mine, just having a catch up with her, and she's in the personal development field, and she has clients.
Oh dear. Neil's
and she said, right, so what have you said? Well, I had a lay-in. She went, good, that's a good start. She said, yes, I had a lay-in. I did some work. I checked my phone. That's not the point. and that's not a real lay-in, And I love the way you say it takes at least 2 weeks. And we almost need to give ourselves permission to do it, because this voice of over busyness screams very loudly, certainly for me.
If I stop, Charlie, here's my problem. If I stop, I collapse. I dare not stop. This is the problem. I'm absolutely honest with you. I am like on it the whole. I mean, tonight, my last show, I'm doing Radio 5 Live. Suddenly, they phone me up today. Would I do a whole thing? So that starts at midnight. All right. So that's all in the back of my head. I got it all the way through the day. All other stuff, other podcasts in the day, more writing. Just been commissioned for another book, and on my last show starts at midnight till probably 1 a.m, and then we start all over again tomorrow. But if I stop, I literally fall over like a tree in the forest. I'm gone completely, but I'm not relaxed. I'm just unconscious, completely different from being relaxed. Totally different. I really get what you're saying. I've never allowed myself that luxury, and boy, do I miss it.
But it's not a luxury. I mean, I saw this meme going around, and it was a really telling one. It said, take time for your health, otherwise you'll have to take time for your illness. Then it said, read that again. And I did, and I was like, oh.
You're right. You're right. No, you're right.
I had my first panic attack just before Christmas, first ever. It happened in the middle of the night. I was fast asleep, and I woke up, and I've actually had a heart attack in my 30s. That was
oh my god!
No, it was a tropical disease, bizarrely, tropical disease that led to me having heart. It was nothing to do with heart disease or lifestyle or anything like that. I wasn't unhealthy, but I had heart. So I know what a real heart attack feels like. I woke up in the night and thought, I'm having a heart attack.
Oh,
and
Jesus.
This was just before Christmas, down in Devon, and we've got we had at the time a 4-month-old baby and the kids, and I woke my other half up and said, don't think this doesn't feel good. called the ambulance. They said, yeah, you need an ambulance, but we can't send you one for 3 hours. So if you can get to hospital soon as do.
3 hours.
I was convinced that it presents. It presents exactly the same as a heart attack. And having had one, the symptoms were exactly the same. And she took me to the hospital. Anyway, turns out it was pretty stressful getting the kids. Had to get the kids up, get them dressed, get in the car. They saw the full pinnacle of the panic attack happened in the entrance of A&E Exeter Hospital. And we took blood and everything else, and they said to me, the doctor came up and he said to me, "No, your heart's absolutely fine. You are medically absolutely fine. You've had a chemical buildup of adrenaline and cortisol, and it's overflowed, and it just had to figure, this is what happens."
And it presents.
Well, that's what causes the panic
just look
attack.
at this
It's
for a
just
second?
basically a build-up of nowhere for these stress chemicals to go.
Yeah,
As it
but what
were.
happened was actually, because I thought it was a heart attack, I did the wrong thing. So when you are having a panic attack, you're not supposed to overventilate and breathe too much. When you are having a heart attack, deep breathing is good for you. And because I thought I was having a heart attack, I started deep breathing, and that actually made it much worse.
I mean,
So
just to make things clear, panic attacks, even though they feel awful, are completely medically safe. Heart attacks are not, clearly, but panic attacks are. They feel awful, but they can't hurt you. That's what I'd say to anyone that fears having a panic attack, because there's
Can we do a deep dive into this, because this is important stuff, and I can see from the numbers people are reacting. We're not here to talk about a heart attack, because we're not medical guys. If you think you're having a heart attack, for Christ's sake, phone 999.
Hopefully I'm not medically trained, but I think
sometimes that month's an
heart
ambulance will
attacks are
arrive.
dangerous.
All right. So a panic attack. Explain, if you'd be so kind, explain the symptoms and why you thought you were having a heart attack.
It feels very similar.
What happened?
It starts with a sort of bizarre, slightly tingly sensation in your chest, and then a little bit of a sort of pressure pain in your arm, in your left arm.
I get
that. And you just feel nothing hurts. There's no pain. But you if you've never experienced it before, you're like, what? Something's not right. And of course, your stress level, and it's a self-perpetuating thing. It tends to, so if you don't know how to react, and basically the best thing to do is to, if you realize it, to zen it out.
Is to what? I'm sorry, the line isn't great. Is if you realize you're having a panic attack, to do what?
Zen it out. You just need to go, okay, medically this is not a problem.
Okay.
Exactly, because if we think it is a problem, but the clue's in the name, we will panic more, and it becomes more of a self-perpetuating cycle. But if you sort of fast forward to the end and know that you can't possibly be hurt, it's less scary, and then you're less likely to bring one on through the fear of having one.
But boys, I'm a meat and potatoes guy. Explain this to me. If you're in the middle of a freaking panic attack, and let's be clear, this is not, I'm a bit nervous, I might be late for a meeting. That's not a panic attack. That's getting nervous. I'm talking about a full-blown panic attack. How do you,
takes a few hours.
Charlie Lamdin, and then Neil, Charlie first. How do you zen it out? How? What do you do?
Let me try a crude metaphor.
Okay.
Imagine a fizzy drink in a bottle, and it's being shaken about because you're anxious and you're a bit stressed, and it starts to fizz up. And when you see it fizzing up, because you're worrying, you start shaking it more. You start to see it fizzing up. You need to just put it down, and just so you can't. I mean, I feel like I have avoided several since then. But with me, I try to regulate my breathing. Don't breathe too deep, don't breathe too fast, just breathe normally. And anyone who's learned how to do basic meditating, it's just that. It's just close your eyes, breathe normally.
Yeah. If people tell me they get panic attacks, I tend to advise them. I always say they're not medically dangerous, so that takes away a lot of the possibility of bringing one on. Just kind of, that's like saying there's nothing to fear but fear itself, kind of thing. So if you're not scared of it, you're less.
But they feel. I'm assuming. I mean, look at Charlie.
No. Hang on.
He's highly successful. He's a logical guy. This is a proper grown up here, right? you're having a panic attack, it's hard not to let it heavily affect you, which is bad.
The other
for your
thing I
health.
was going to go on and say, because I have
Go
experienced panic attacks years ago, but I did. The metaphor I would use, and I love your metaphor, by the way, Charlie, but the metaphor I would use is if you're a stone on the beach and the tide is coming in, okay, and the tide is the panic attack, the worst thing the stone could do is try and fight the tide off. It's going to lose. However, if the tide just washes over it, it will wash over and it will pass quite naturally. It's like, it's coming back to what you resist persists. If you push against it, it adds fuel to it. If you just go, oh, here I am, sort of observing your feelings, like in a mindfully sort of way. Oh, here I am having a panic attack, and become the observer, and it passes a lot quicker because you're not fighting it or resisting it.
But Longie, if you use your stone on the beach analogy, and the ocean is the panic attack, and you're the stone on Brighton Beach or whatever,
yeah,
don't you feel? And then, Charlie, I don't know, I'm fishing here. Don't you feel that the panic attack is absolutely drowning you? That's what I get from your analogy.
No, because stones don't need to breathe, and panic attacks can't drown you.
Okay.
I mean, what I think is worth adding, I mean, I've only had one, and hopefully it's the only one I ever have. And the way the doctor described it to me chemically afterwards, or medically afterwards, actually really helped me go, oh, okay.
Go on.
But first of all, it's worth saying what happened. So, I mean, it got to the point where it was a full-on blackout. I was temporarily unconscious. It
Wow.
was, and they thought, before they'd done their tests, the guys in the hospital thought it was a heart attack as well.
Right.
Because it presented. And afterwards, the doctor came up and explained it to me, and he said, what happens is you have a gradual long-term build-up. So I'm not someone that suffers from anxiety. I've just been fortunate. I've never suffered from anxiety.
Okay.
But I do consciously choose to continue down a very stressful path, which I try and manage. And he said, it is a long-term build-up of cortisol, the stress hormone. And then you have adrenaline, which is the fight or flight stuff when you start to worry about it. And then he said, you hyperventilated. So you over-oxygenated yourself, and that triggered a chemical reaction. You just had to put yourself out. He said it's like a cascade. It overflows, and it's a process. It works itself out, and then you're literally fine. He said you're fine. You can go now. Don't worry about anything.
And how did you feel? How did you feel when he said you're fine? You can go.
Just relief, because I thought, I mean, immense relief. I was like, oh, thank God for that. I'm absolutely fine. That was nothing medical. That was.
So here's the question, Charlie. Here's the question from Francine Warner, the Queen of Northwest London. Do you not realize that this is not a heart attack? How can you differentiate?
Call a doctor like Charlie did and let them tell you.
And that's the only thing to do. So don't sit there thinking, I wonder. Just call it.
If it's your first one,
panic attacks aren't dangerous. Heart attacks are.
Yeah.
Oh my God, look at this. Now, Leslie Ian Jones, who was commenting, I put up some of his comments just a moment ago. I'm just going to read this out for everyone who's listening, who can't see us, but is just taking the audio feed, as we call it. Jesus, I hate, oh man. My brother killed himself due to pressure and emotions he couldn't handle. Saw what that did to my mother. Yep. And swore never to let anyone or anything grind me down. Leslie, you are so right. And as I always say, when we've dealt with suicide, and we've talked about suicide prevention, which is a huge thing, Neil and I dealt with a lot, and Phil and I have dealt with a lot in the past. We don't on a Friday, it's too heavy. I always say this. For the person who's ended their own life, their suffering is over. For everybody left behind, their suffering has just started. It's brutal. And Leslie, I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea. Azadon Brown. Would you read this, Neil?
Yes, I will. Just looking something else to talk about. Sue Sleet, you're absolutely right. As a volunteer firefighter, I've used and taught my fellow members tools for coping, managing stress and various stimuli. You see, I think also what you said, Charlie, it ties in with modern day problems today, because we get this pulled up. And what you said on the biochemical makes complete sense. It's a release, and I'm not surprised it felt very cathartic and healing afterwards. It's a bit like throwing up. If you're ill, you feel better afterwards, essentially. Yeah. It's like emotional vomiting, if you like. Sorry to be so gross, but it kind of is. but we don't generally have a good way, and this touches on what Leslie said, of managing these emotions and allowing them to release. In the wild, if a gazelle gets chased by a lion, you see them do that shaking, and they're literally shaking off the stress chemicals, and then 2 minutes later, they're fine. And there is, I learned recently, about 4 years ago, I went to this little seminar, there's a human equivalent, I can't remember the exact name of it, it's what I was looking up, but it's something like total release technique. I'll look it up and find it. And it's essentially treating you, and they've rolled this out to the police and people in the fire service. It's relatively not that well known in the general public, but they have. And it's really this technique where you can do that kind of almost shaking, which an animal would do, but it manages these emotions and it stops the build-up coming. It was very good.
I'd like to add something else into all this. I think for whatever difficulties and struggles and conditions that people are having, I, as someone who has to use social media extensively in promoting Best Agent and Moving Home with Charlie and publishing, social media should be treated like alcohol or any other stimulant. It is lovely and great, but if you don't stop, you literally treat it like something that you just do a little bit a day or a little bit a week, or hide it, not constantly. And if you do, I have had to force myself to recognize an unhealthy addiction to the stimulation that comes from social media interactions. And therefore I have now 2 different phones, and my family call it my hangout phone. And on my hangout phone, there are 0 social media apps. I can use it for taking photographs, making phone calls, and sending WhatsApp messages to my friends and family. That is it. I cannot access social media on that phone. And it means, but even if I've got the other phone in my pocket and I know that I've got those social apps in my pocket, it alters my state of mind, even if I'm not looking at the phone, thinking about it. I'm wondering what's happening. When I physically leave that phone behind and go out for the day without it, it's like a weight is lifted.
Of course it is.
No, I
It
can believe that, because we're so.
It's shocking.
It was meant to connect us all, but it's made us more separate. There's a great meme that goes around, and I think it's a picture of a forest, and it says, "There's no internet here, but a much better connection," which is kind of one level.
I can't let this pass, because we had Leslie Ian Jones, who lost his brother to suicide.
So sorry to hear that, Leslie.
Chrissy Richards has lost not 1 but 2. And she says, mine's 18 years, and after June, even more. That was last year. Very hard at times. Sat here colouring my mandalas is very helpful to me. She lives in Spain. I can't imagine. Right. Francine has another. Can you explain the difference between anxiety and panic?
I'll give that a go if you want.
And then Charlie. So Neil first, if you don't mind.
I would, and this is a personal opinion, I would define anxiety as a fear of something that's going to happen in the future. Anxiety never happens in the present moment. It's always what might happen in the future, as opposed to what did happen in the past. Guilt in the past, anxiety in the future. Panicky, I would say that's the body's response to something it thinks has happened, even though it hasn't in a panic attack. It's just a build-up. So the body's responding as if it has, to get rid of it, to purge it, I would say.
Charlie, what do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think that, neither of those are medical terms. The actual medical terms for these things are something different, very complicated chemical names and stuff. I agree with that, worrying about the future, anxiety. But the difference between, if we're just talking about anxiety, panic is right now, isn't it? Like right now, panic is a feeling of, oh my God, what are we going to do right now?
Exactly. Anxiety is more future-based.
Francine, I can answer this for you, but it's only addressed to you. Anxiety is, have I made enough smoked salmon cream cheese bagels because Russ is coming around? Panic is when Cyril arrives unexpectedly. Just putting it out there. Francine will feel much better now, I can assure you about that. Now,
that's going to be the most unscientific thing ever said on radio.
It's unscientific, but you see, the beauty of Men's Radio Station, especially our daily show, is I can make it very personalised, unlike the BBC. Talk about.
So, Charlie, you're still on a very. Go on. You're still on a very stressful path, you say. You were talking about social media and how you like to curate it. I don't blame you. I use social media to promote things. I've got my Facebook and Instagram link to put it on Facebook. Goes on there. I don't have to worry about it. I'll log on once a night for about 15 minutes for the nightly barracking, I call it. It's just everyone basically taking the piss out of each other, and it's the online equivalent of being rude to the neighbour over the back. Oh, sod off, you sod off, and it's kind of fun, 15 minutes barracking.
Oh, to live with Neil must be
my golden rule of social media is if I wouldn't say it to your face, I wouldn't say it online.
Precisely. Thank you.
All kinds of trouble. But you're right. It can overstimulate us. It can overstimulate the dopamine, the reward system. It's a really good thing on Netflix. I think it's called The Social Dilemma. If you've not seen that,
it should be that should be shown in school, Neil.
Yeah,
the
really
dilemma
interesting.
Should be shown.
The effort that is being got, the effort has been put out by the corporates to capture our attention and get our eyeballs glued to the screen. It's worth watching. It's quite eye opening. So, but you were going to talk about a state agency as well. I remember this from last time. Tell us more about
that. Housing. So my working life goal is a home for everyone. I've been working alongside the housing market, like as a supplier to estate agents for 25 years. And I've learned an awful lot about what happens at a bird's eye view of the whole country's industry. I've had clients from countrywide, the biggest corporate clients, down to one-man bands all over the country, England, Wales, and Scotland. And I have an understanding. I've always had a fascination. Like, why, when estate agents and movers actually need the same thing, right? The mover needs to move house. Yep. The estate agent needs them to move, otherwise they don't get paid.
Yep.
When their goals are actually aligned, why is it such a godforsaken shit fight for everybody involved, movers and agents?
It's hideous,
right?
It's hideous, Charlie.
But it's not just bad for the movers; it's bad for the agents as well. I've always thought to myself, whenever people's basic goals are aligned with that, there's always a better way, and that's what I've been fighting to do for years with the technology that I've provided, and I've made some steps and inroads into that. Now, along the way, I have learned stuff about the housing market, about housing, about homelessness, about housing supply, about all of the metrics that affect it. And I've looked at the immense amount of money the government spends on homelessness, and the immense amount of money going to charity, on the homelessness charities and supports, and it is hundreds of millions of pounds a year. It is huge.
Where's it go? Where does it go, Charlie?
Well, number one, it goes for paying temporary accommodation for 250,000 homeless people. Yep. And this is the silly thing, like the amount of money the taxpayer is spending, which is much more expensive than if they actually just had a home to rent.
And that's basically the kind of charity equivalent of rent. So in a sense, it's their money, isn't it?
It's a horrifically inefficient. And the worst thing is that even for the people on the receiving end of this, the people who have been put up in hotels and bed and breakfasts and guest houses and temporary, you cannot. A person without a home is like a seed that isn't planted. Your chance of actually fulfilling your life's potential, short and long term, is on hold. If you're living in temporary accommodation, you cannot put roots down. Metaphorically, you can't grow.
It's like Maslow's pyramid, his hierarchy of needs, and without the foundation, everything else is very difficult. You can't be contemplating self-realization at the top when you haven't got a place to stay at the bottom. I understand.
And this situation is bad. It's getting worse. And yet, it is I believe this strongly enough. I'm basically dedicating my career to it. And succeed or fail, I'm happy to be spending my time trying to achieve this. And if I don't manage to achieve it in my lifetime, maybe I'll inspire some others or my kids to keep going if we're making progress. But there is the potential to solve the problem. Just looking at the sheer resources of it, there is enough space for everybody to have a home. And I am a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist. I am not a socialist. I am absolutely capitalist because capitalism stimulates innovation faster than anything else, and innovation lifts people out of poverty faster than anything else. So whilst it is a deeply, deeply flawed system, and one of the biggest problems of it is, of course, increasing income inequality that happens as a result of capitalism, it is the least bad option that there is at the moment. So at the same time, capitalism doesn't mean that you shouldn't help people in need. The thing is, how you help them is different. No one likes a handout. It just makes you feel shit if you have to take handouts. I mean, if you're in a position where you've got to take a handout because the alternative is even worse, you're already in a really bad situation.
Charlie, I'm going to jump in. When I was a trustee of what was Variety Club, then became Children's Variety, the children's charity. I preferred it as Variety Club. And I once said to somebody, I said, this whole thing about handouts. And she said to me, she was very clever, very wise. And she said, Russ, it's not a handout, it's a hand up.
That's what they
And
say
I
with the big
thought
issue.
that was great. It was a hand up. And I thought, what a beautiful phrase. It's all about perception. It's about phraseology, and it's phraseology, and it's about perception as well, and how you see yourself. Because I agree with you. Yeah, no one likes.
And there's no shame. There's no shame in needing help. Everyone needs a little help from time to time. But I'm really excited to hear this potential solution, because I hear this from time to time. I meet, I'll talk about some before we finish today, Russ. But like yourself, I meet people who I would probably call visionary, like yourself, Charlie, who've got this vision of a better way of doing it. And these solutions in many fields from many people seem to be sort of coming into our consciousness and lexicon bit by bit by bit. And we need solutions. So tell us more about your vision. There's enough space for everyone to have a house.
I think it was Desmond Tutu who said, once you've been pulling people out of the river long enough, you need to stop pulling them out and walk upstream and find out why they're falling in.
Who's chucking them in? Yeah.
And if it is the charities and the government and social services that are actually helping people pulling them out, that's the that there's prevention and then there's cure, isn't there? They're doing the cure. They're helping the people in need, but nothing's being done.
Yeah, they're treating the symptom, but what cause needs to be addressed here?
Yeah. Well, there is a long and complex list of causes. And unfortunately, the typical assumption people make is, they've probably just taken too many drugs or made bad decisions or done things. Yeah, there's this very unpleasant attitude of some people is somehow their own. And that is clearly not the case. And when I discovered, I was talking to council in Devon and Dorset about an idea we had for guaranteeing people's rent and get into private rented out of council, out of the care system into private rented. And what they explained to me was that, and the numbers are there if anyone wants to look them up, 1/3 of new homelessness cases defined as the council has actually registered them as, yes, you are now officially a homeless person, we accept you. Right? 1/3 of those were people who were in work, paid to date in their rent, and were asked to leave their property by the landlord for reasons that beyond their fault. Now, I'm not demonizing the landlords. What I'm saying is these are people who had no social issues, no problems, no addiction issues, that kind of stuff. They were in work, they were in a home. For whatever reasons, the landlord needed to take the home back, and there were no fault evictions, weren't in arrears, they hadn't been antisocial, and they were given the notice, whatever, and they simply haven't been able to find another home. And what happens then is that someone said to me, you try driving a lorry for 8 hours a day when you haven't been able to sleep for the night. If you lose your home and you don't have somewhere to stay, you are going to lose your job. It's almost impossible to hold down a job if you don't have somewhere safe to sleep at night.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
So
do you think,
even if we ignore it,
I was going to say this, the reason most people, me initially, I'm not going to be a hypocrite of that. You say, oh, they're alcoholics, or they're drug addicts, usually. I think it's out of fear. Because the thought that it could happen to you is so freaking terrifying that it's easier to say, well, they're an alcoholic and a drug addict. You know that you're not an alcoholic or a drug addict, so it can't happen to you. My late best friend, Francis McGuy in Los Angeles, would always say to me, Russ, we're one paycheck away from the street. One paycheck away. Now, in America, there's no safety net. Trust me, there is no safety net. 1 minute you're fine, the next minute you're living in a tent. And if you saw what Los Angeles and Santa Monica look like now, you would freak out completely. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Over here, there is a degree of a safety net that you will fall into. Hopefully.
To some
but
degree,
boy, oh boy, there's some massive holes in that net that you could fall right the way through. And to just reiterate and to support what you're saying, Charlie, is some years ago with Chris Tarrant, we spent a night on the street for Centre Point. We both knew we were going to sleep on the street, raising money, raising awareness, the usual thing. They wanted us to do it, fine, okay. So I dressed up like Nanook of the North. I brought loads of cardboard. I had everything that I could do to protect myself. Plus, we had security. Chris and I had security with us. One, it was freezing. We slept in Covent Garden on the cobbles. Despite all the precautions and everything that I knew that I'd have to bring, it was beyond freezing cold. Two, the middle of the night, thank God there was security because people came. We just looked like bums and they're going to kick the shit out of us. Let's be perfectly honest. Thank goodness we had security with us. Number three, we spoke to the people. Of course we did. And Chris is excellent at that. Chris is excellent. I learnt a lot from him. They weren't drug addicts. They weren't alcoholics. They were some of them completely normal, middle-class people whose life had just collapsed. They were too embarrassed to tell their families. So for months, they were going off with a briefcase. I mean, God.
A lot of ex-military.
It changed my life. It was hideous. Hideous. I can't tell you how. And I thought, you stupid bastard, Russell, you're doing this for one night. And you know you're going home to somewhere pretty nice, having a nice warm bath. That's the end of it. These people around you, there's no home to go to, no nice and warm bath, and no end in sight of that nightmare.
But it also flags up something how much we feel as a society we're supposed to have all the answers all the time. And if these people are too embarrassed to reach out to their families because they feel like they've failed in some way, you know, that needs changing as well. Of course, you reach out to your family, in my humble opinion. If, you know, I'm sure most families would hopefully help you, one would hope.
Ramsey, don't get me started. Boy, have you hit a nerve with me there. Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
No,
so there does seem to be, I mean, I would like to see more, Charlie, preventative things in society. This is what you're talking about. So it doesn't have to come to crisis point before we think, oh my God, something needs an overhaul. We really need to do something about it. I would like there to be a sort of stage before where people could, you know, be more on the pathway that you're talking about, as it were, and it wouldn't create the need for these desperate solutions because the situation wouldn't get desperate in the first place. And there's many places around the world doing great things in many fields. Off the top of my head, Portugal, how they're dealing with drugs, Norway, the prison system there. All of this we could learn from. And I think we can learn an awful lot from you as well. So please continue. Please, back to you.
Well, I mean, it's a gargantuan problem that no one's going to solve overnight. And my only hope is that I think that the property sector, which is where I've made my living for the last 25 years, has immense resources. And I'm not talking about, I mean, I do want to mention this, right? The most profitable business on the UK Stock Exchange, the most profitable business by percentage profit is Rightmove. It makes over 70% net profit. It's just posted profits of £241 million.
Wowza.
It gives nothing to homelessness. Zero. And that is
we not
symptomatic. That is symptomatic of the attitude of a lot of the corporations in the property sector. And I have to call out, so Savills is one of the best ones. Savills, I think, gives £800,000 or something, which for one company, that's a big chunk of money. Fine and Country is very, very active in raising money. And that's so there are some good ones. But unfortunately, even those six-figure numbers are drops in the ocean of the roughly £1 billion a year between government and charity that's going to fight homelessness, right? So if it's £1 billion a year being spent on housing homeless people and fighting all the rest of it, you know, £1 million from the property sector is 0.01%. It's not touching the sides of the problem. No. And the resources I'm talking about aren't money necessarily. The resources I'm talking about are, so for example, here's an example, right? If I was running Rightmove and I had a company making that much profit, I would say to my entire staff, you can all take one working day a month of your time and give your time to any local housing-related charity that you want. However that works out, whether you do it 2 weeks a block or whether it's one day a month or whatever it might be, 5% of your time is yours to give to your local community however you like. Because wouldn't that be great in the housing sector? Or maybe they could say, right, we spend £25 million a year advertising. We're going to give bottom left-hand corner of any of our adverts anywhere, whether it's on telly or anywhere else, we're going to give it to Centrepoint or crisis or something like that. We could help raise awareness. Or the big issue, which my God does amazing work and is the most underfunded of all the homelessness charities, right? They could be doing these things, and it would not only would it cost them nothing to do it. Imagine what that would do for the sense of well-being of the staff, and imagine what it would do for their public perception.
Now, in the immortal words, I have to say this legally, in the immortal words of Phil Dave and my training, I have to say that Rightmove are not here to answer your queries, not here, I don't want to say defend themselves, but to put their case. So we're very well aware
what I've
here.
said can be verified if you look at the annual accounts, because they
no, I'm not
state
saying it's not true. I'm not saying it's not true.
No, what
I am saying is they're not here to give their rationale for why. That's all.
Oh, hey, they're not obliged.
They're not obliged. I mean, they're not obliged to do it.
Look, all of the other.
Yeah. Look, Charlie.
They could all just say,
Charlie, when I'm in town, like I'm visiting my pals in the cigar shop on Mount Street, and see my pals there, right? There's an estate agent's just on the corner next to the cigar shop, and you look at the cost of a flat at 23 million, 30 million, and you're thinking, Christ, I stand there and I laugh. I literally laugh out loud that someone's going to look in the window. There's a flat for 30 million pounds. You go, yeah, I'm in the mood. Yeah, 30 million. It's fantasy land, isn't it? It's fantasy land.
Yeah.
So it would be a drop in the ocean to take a percentage. I totally get that.
But my point is, what they do have, so around the country, the best estate agents have very close relationships with local landlords. Functioning relationships. They know the people. Landlords like to be private for obvious reasons, but the agents know, and landlords have obviously they've often got resources, they've got properties, they've often got things that they could be talked into doing. So, for example, I was working with Dorset Council and talking to them, and they said that their number one problem, which surprised me, it was they have children that come into the care system, and the council is responsible for their homing and their education until they're 25 years old. And when they're 25 years old, they then have to try and put them into society, and they have to leave the council care system. And they told me a story about a girl who'd been with them, as an orphan, I think she was. So she'd been through the care system, been through fostering, but she'd not had any problems. She'd been a success story in a way. She'd gone to university. She got a degree as a teacher. She'd come back from university. No substance abuse problems, no social problems. She'd just been through the system, and they couldn't get a landlord to give her a flat to start her teaching job because she'd come from the care system, and there was a stigma attached to that. We don't want people from the care system, their problems. Wow. And so you get this case where you get someone a poor kid that's made an amazing turnaround of their circumstances into I've got a degree as a teacher, I've got a job as a teacher, I now just need a home because the council is no longer obliged to house me when I reach 25. Nothing. And they said, the problem is perception of landlords. And again, this is where estate agents actually start to influence their landlord clients and their relationships with those guys. So there are empty properties everywhere. Estate agents know who the owners of these empty properties are. There are opportunities in the short. I mean, one of the ideas, for example, I had was this. Imagine you're a landlord. I know that at the moment, renting, there's not a lot of spare stuff lying around unrented. Okay, I get that.
Not in London, there ain't. There's nothing. Nothing.
No. It's changing. It is just changing. There's a bit more hanging around. Prices are starting to drop. I've got a friend of mine lives in Putney, and he's seen stuff that's sitting on the market not renting. They're actually having to lower the asking price because they're not yet rented out. So it is. I think we might have seen the worst of the rent price increases. So there's one idea, for example, and yes, you might not work in London, but in lots of other towns. Imagine if you said to a landlord, sign up to this scheme where you make your empty property available on a short-term, week-by-week basis to council-approved people in need of temporary accommodation. And just by even if it's not used, even if that property is not used, you won't have to pay council tax on your empty property. So your reward for participating in the scheme and being as a backup if needed is no council tax on your property. And you're also and if we do use your property, you'll get paid for it, and you'll get paid at proper rates, the short-term rates. And we, the council, will indemnify you against any problems or damages arising. That's just one of the long list of ideas.
Charlie, how does this stand with people who suddenly say, "Oh, I'm a sitting tenant. Screw you, I'm not leaving"? How does that stand? That's what they'd be afraid of. I'm a sitting tenant. Try and get me out.
I think we need to ask Hattie on Wednesday.
Well, we can ask Hattie on Wednesday. Yeah.
I think this is where, if the council guarantees the landlord against that, and the council is choosing which people qualify for this accommodation and which don't. So, for example, you've got someone who's just come out of let's just say someone who's been forced out of their flat by a landlord for potentially perfectly good reasons. They have a job. Like you said you met some middle-class people who've fallen on hard times, sleeping on the streets in Covent Garden, right? The council are qualified to identify between the people who've got the severe social problems and the ones that are actually just having a really rough patch, falling between two stools through no fault of their own. So the council can make up their own mind if they're prepared to take on the risk of saying, we can indemnify the landlord against this, and if you end up with a sitting tenant, we're paying the rent. That's the council's back.
Yeah, I see where
that happens.
I see where you're going. To give you an idea, by the way, Charlie, you will know this. A very, very close friend of mine sadly had a stroke, had to sell their house because they had to have a flat with one level, right? The house sold. 20 minutes. 20 minutes the other week.
Where was it?
It was in a part of London off the Finchley Road. It's a very pretty part and much sought after. It was a lovely house, as it happens.
It doesn't
not
surprise
huge,
me.
but a very lovely house. 20 minutes. Full asking price, 20 minutes.
So people want to learn more about this wonderful work that you're doing. I'm really fascinated to see where this path's going to lead. I think this path is fascinating and is bringing some great things into the world, which we need, Charlie. So if people want to learn more, where can they find out more about it than you?
Well, I should point out that at the moment, everything I'm talking about is a bit of a pipe dream. The whole idea.
We like pipe dreams. That's what makes life go round. We like that.
Best Agent is their property website where we list all the property for sale and to rent in the whole of England and Wales. We're not yet covering Scotland or Northern Ireland, but we will. And it's designed to be. I mean, Rightmove's been around for 20 years, and there's lots of stuff you can't do online in Rightmove. Best Agent is designed to be a better version. Make it easier to connect with agents for people who are happy using tech to send video messages without revealing their contact information. Book viewings online.
What's the website, dude? I'll pop it on the screen.
It's bestagent.co.uk. Thank you. It is still in its early days, and not without its little wrinkles. I mean, in physical property terms, what we've built is the equivalent of a Westfield, a brand new giant Westfield, right? And it's now the construction is complete, but there's a lot of snagging still happening. So it's not working perfectly. But I don't have, for reasons that may be obvious, I don't have investors, venture capitalists, partners, that kind of stuff, because they don't like when you want to make a difference first and money later. They want you to make money first. I've already had offers of investment.
Running a radio station for mental health and well-being. I wouldn't know anything about that, Charlie. That you want to make a difference first and then make the money.
I'm actually preparing to do a video on my Moving Home with Charlie channel where I give free advice to home movers. About it's called Investors versus the People.
Nice, because it was. I think they always, because all these things are always like investors in people. You think, what a load of bollocks! No, you're not. You're not.
It is. It's
investors
versus the people. Because
Charlie Lamdin, we are out of time.
Okay.
I'd like you to come back if you could bear dealing with myself and Neil. Probably easier to deal with Neil. He's much nicer than I am, I can be honest with you. It's been fascinating. It's probably not where you wanted to go, but it's important. The stuff you were saying, I think, really hit home. You know,
very much does, and with certainly a mental health angle. So it's been great, Charlie. Thank you very much. Do come back and do keep in touch.
We'll have you back. Yes.
Bestagent.co.uk if you'd like to.
And
if you'd like to cut off Charlie's jib,
Julia. Just say to her, boobtastic. She'll know what I mean. Bye.
Bestagent.co.uk if
We
you like the
like it. What a
customer's
nice
jib.
fella. There we are.
There we go.
We'll,
That
we'll
was
live
good.
with that. We'll live with that. Okay.
You didn't
so,
give me time to tell you about my weekend. We've only got 15 seconds.
Go on then.
All right, I've got an amazing guest coming soon called Madeline Black, very inspiring woman. I learned about a credible military charity that's using stand-up comedy to heal, and I met a woman that's taken over the pub that I used to drink underage in when I was 16, and she's got this most visionary idea, all including mental health, which I'll talk about on the next show.
I want them all. We'll be back on Wednesday. Until then, try and stay out of trouble. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Love you, hug you, squeeze you.